Today, how to turn your daily driver into a dedicated off-roader. Part 1 of our cheap Jeep build-up on a budget. Plus, the legend of Bigfoot, gearhead style, on its 30th anniversary. Xtreme 4x4 starts now.
Welcome to Xtreme 4x4 and our real-world build-up cheap Jeep. We know what it's like. You choose to have a dedicated trail rig, so you park your daily driver and pick up another truck.
The only problem is cash is low, so you gotta build your project really slow, and waiting 3 or 4 years to get it done isn't our idea of fun.
So today we're gonna take that CJ7 and show you how you can build a comparable crawler with almost no cash.
We've had this Jeep around the shop for a while.
Hold on.
We've even taken it out and had some fun with it, but we've made the decision. The plates are coming off, and the CJ from here on out is trail only.
If you search some internet auction sites or the classified ads, you can find one of these Jeeps for around $2,500 to $3,500. Less the cost of the Jeep, we plan to spend no more than $5 grand.
Today we plan on addressing suspension, wheels and tires, lockers, and body protection. And then we're gonna test it. But before we test it, we gotta have something to test it with.
And that's why we're gonna build an RTI ramp. RTI stands for Ramp Travel Index. And if you've been to organized off-road events, more than likely you've seen RTI ramps set up on day 1 of the competition. Like this one here at last year's Top Truck Challenge. What you saw on that tape when those trucks were being measured is they're actually being scored. And what that means is they take the distance the vehicle travels up the ramp, divide that by the wheelbase, multiply it by 1,000, and that's going to equal the RTI.
With the massive amounts of super flexible suspensions available, it's more common for people to score a perfect 1,000. So to make it more difficult, they're increasing the angle of the ramp.
We are going to use a pretty standard 20-degree ramp in this shop. After it's built, we will score the CJ to get a baseline. The first thing we did was map out our ramp design on the floor. Then we cut the steel to fit the design and began tacking it together. Now the next thing we have to do is solve for the height of our ramp. We know that we're going to build it at a 20-degree angle and that the base is 15 feet long. So using some simple trigonometry, I found out it's 5.45 feet tall. Now, don't let the word trigonometry worry you. If math wasn't your best subject in high school, you can go on the internet and find right-angle triangle calculators that'll do all the math for you. To save some time, we pre-cut the rest of the metal, so this should go together pretty smoothly.
With our ramp coming together, Ian will measure for the plate surface while I finish up.
Freeze! Hold it right there. All right, confession time. You guys know we don't build these trucks or make these shows in just one day. This little piece of tape is the last we're gonna see of Jessi for this week. Poor Jessi lasted as long as she could, until our producer rushed her to the emergency room with severe stomach pain. Now, a few hours later, she had her appendix removed. Now, don't worry, she's doing fine. She's gonna be in the hospital for a couple days, and I know we're all gonna miss her. But for us, the reality is, show's gotta go on. With the ramp built, we can test our Jeep to get a baseline. Our PA Hutch is gonna guide me up. Hold it, you're off. I guess so it's about as high as it's gonna get. We don't have to worry about scoring a perfect 1,000 with this truck, but But don't worry, during the break, we'll calculate what we got, and by the end of the show, you're going to see a dramatic improvement. Just mark it on there. What do we get?
4 feet.
That's not bad.
Up next, Bigfoot turns 30 this year. We'll meet the creator and dip into the archives of this monster truck legend when Xtreme 4x4 continues.
The Xtreme 4x4 Event of the Week is brought to you by Warren, #1 in winches.
I've got to say, a 468 isn't that great a score on the ramp, but it's a good start. And once we throw some lockers and some flexible suspension at that Jeep, you'll see that number change greatly. But first, we're going to the four-wheel jamboree in Indianapolis, where the most popular attraction has always been, and always will be, monster trucks.
Trucks, trucks, and more trucks are what the traveling four-wheel jamborees are about. But when the monster trucks hit the track, the rabid four-wheel jamboree fans go insane.
It's hard to explain. It's just an adrenaline rush out of this world. I mean, we're out there running these 10,000-pound trucks, flying over cars, banging gears. I mean, it's awesome. You can hear the crowd. Ain't nothing like it.
And no truck whips them into a frenzy like Bigfoot.
Taking the monster truck, Bigfoot!
He may look like your average middle-aged gearhead, but 30 years ago, Bob Chandler had an idea that would change the truck world forever. When the mild-mannered Missourian created the first monster truck, little did he know world domination was only a few car crushes away.
It was an advertising tool for my four-wheel drive shop, you know, and I put all kinds of products on it, big tires, roll bar lights and all that thing. So you want to show off what you have, and that's what it started out as a tool. I'd race it every weekend, come back with it broke, and my general manager called me Bigfoot because I couldn't put a foot out of the throttle. We stuck the name on the truck, and it fit the truck.
As Bigfoot's popularity grew, so did the truck.
I kept breaking things, so you put bigger axles in it. Okay, then you're doing okay for a while, so then you put bigger tires on it so you can go more places. Then you don't have enough power, so then you put a bigger engine in it, you know, it's just a vicious cycle.
Car crushing gave way to racing in the late 80s. And like mad scientists, Chandler and crew set out to design the most advanced monster truck the world had ever seen.
This truck is a stage 3. It's tube chassis, nitrogen gas shocks, and we went from 4 inches of suspension travel, now we're running as much as 30 inches of suspension. And they're bypass shocks, and it's just much, much easier on a driver, much easier on a truck.
Dan Runty has been a Bigfoot driver for 15 years.
I've seen a lot of changes. These trucks with the safety and the suspension and everything that Bob has put into them, it's a lot more comfortable to drive, you know, and it's not as hard on a driver.
In 1999, Runty proved to the world that these machines are more of a technical marvel than a Frankenstein gimmick.
It's in the world's Guinness Book of Records, you know, at 202 foot we jumped a grounded Boeing 727.
10,000 pounds and not supposed to fly. We had it down to where we knew what size ramp, we knew the length of the ramp, and we knew what speed he had to go. And he says, when I saw that plane in front of me, he says, I didn't care about the speed, I just put my foot to the floor. So instead of 60 like we figured, he went 70, and he was 13 feet over the top of the plane.
As far as the highlight of working at Bigfoot, that's probably something that I'm pretty proud of.
From world records to world titles, Hollywood movies to best-selling toys, Bigfoot is more than a truck. It's an American institution.
I didn't have the intention of building a monster truck when I started, it just happened. And I really think that if I didn't do it, somebody else would have. It was time. Maybe I'm modest, but that's the way I feel.
Today, there are almost 100 monster trucks competing around the world, but none are as loved as Bob Chandler's Ford.
My cousins lived up by past Bigfoot shop, drive by there when I was a kid. It was like, that, you know, it just enticed me, you know, just was something cool. I don't know. Now we're doing it.
The truck was popular with kids. I knew that from the very beginning, and everybody asked me why. I don't know why. You know, it's their brother or their dad's truck, only on steroids or something. You know, but kids like big things.
With almost 1,000 appearances each year, Bigfoot's popularity shows no sign of letting up. As for Bob Chandler, his place in motorsports history is secure.
I see a crowd there and I think, well, maybe that had something to do with bringing him here, and that I do feel good about that. And somebody the other day, instead of the father of Monster, called me the grandfather and says, I guess that's the way it happened. So.
Damn. Bob Chandler and his crew have 7 Bigfoots traveling around North America, and they've even got one in the UK. If you want to see one in person, check out a 4-wheel jamboree. We'll put that information on the website after the show. That's awesome.
For more information on anything you've seen today, check us out online, Xtreme4x4TV.com.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4 and our cheap Jeep build-up. If you remember, we're taking this 82 Jeep CJ7 and turning it into a true off-road machine. So Hutch is pulling the license plate because we're not going to need it for the road anymore. When we rolled this thing up that articulation ramp, when this left rear tire left the ground, we stopped moving. And that's because this thing has an open diff in the rear. So to solve that, we're going to put in some lockers. Now, when you're on a budget and you're thinking of lockers, you don't need to dump $1,000 into your axle just to lock it up. You can go ahead and get these genuine gear quick locks. This assembly is simply going to replace all the internal gears inside that differential. The outer piece is going to spline onto the axle, and then when the wheel starts to spin, you're actually going to engage these teeth. That's going to lock that whole rear axle together. But the best thing for us at $300 is the cost per axle and easy to install. Once the axles are free, we can remove the inspection cover and then pull out the carrier. With the internal gears out of the carrier, you prep the quick locks by installing the pins into the elongated holes with some grease. Then the clutch spacers and clutches are placed in the carrier. The springs and pins are aligned and installed. Then the carrier is reassembled and you bolt it back into the axle. Torquing the cap bolts and reassembling the brake system. Then do the same thing up front. And that about does it, lockers front and rear. And if you have a look inside that diff, you can see how this thing works. As you can see now, these two axles are locked together when I turn this side. But when you turn the wheel, your wheels have to travel at different speeds. So I'll get Hutch to grab that far side. You got it? Got it. Now when I turn the wheel now, you're going to hear a click. That's that quick lock slipping. You're going to hear that whenever you turn the wheel, and the steering is going to feel a little bit stiffer. But the reality is it's a small price to pay for a locked front diff. And now it's time to tackle the suspension. We're going to perform a pretty typical change to this, and that's called a spring over axle. We're going to take this leaf spring pad and mount it to the top side of this axle tube. The Jeep comes from the factory with the axle on top of the spring, and we're going to move that axle to the underside. That's going to give us more clearance under the body, and it's also going to give us a little bit of lift. Best thing is, it only costs like $50 to do the whole truck. After unbolting the leaf spring, lower the differential and move the spring to the top side. Weld on the new spring purchase and put it all back together. It's that simple. Welcome back to Xtreme. As you can see, this cheap Jeep buildup is a lot of work, especially without Jessi around. She had to be rushed to the hospital in the middle of this project. Doctors pulled her appendix out, but don't worry, she's still feisty and doing fine. We sent her some reading material to make sure she wouldn't get bored, and she'll hopefully be back with us next week, maybe just on light duty though. Get well soon, Jessi! Just a few more pieces on this Jeep and it's ready to go back on that RTI ramp. Now the spring overlift is going to give us height for tires, but this TerraFlex revolver shackle is going to help us with articulation. When we unload that tire, it's going to stretch that spring back out to keep it on the ground, and then when you put pressure back on the wheel, it's going to close back up to get back to ride height. The best thing about this is it replaces the stock piece, and it's only $200 to get that much articulation in an axle is a steal. They simply bolt in place of the stock shackles on the Jeep. So John from Poughkeepsie wants to know, why do you always work on brand new trucks? Well, because it's easier. They don't smell like waffles. All right, the shackle's on. It's time to deal with the wheels and tires. Now, everybody loves beadlocks. They're a great idea. Not everyone can afford beadlocks, but the nice thing is, if you have a steel wheel, like this one that we picked up from ProComp, and one of these beadlock kits that we got from Rock Stompers, you can turn any steel wheel into a beadlock. The inside ring simply welds to the rim, and then the outside ring bolts on. Now, it's 32 bolts per tire, 4 tires, it's 128 bolts. Yeah, I miss Jessi. You simply grind off the paint, install the new inner lock ring, and weld away. Beadlocks will allow you to air down the tire for increased traction, plus changing a tire on the trail becomes a lot easier. For trail-only tires, a lot of it boils down to personal preference. We've always had good luck with these Super Swamp or boggers for muddy, loose gravel, and wet rocks kind of terrain. How's that tire?
Whoa, you're there.
Whoa, I'd say so. All right, let's check this out. If you remember last time, we only went 44 inches with this truck. So let's see what we get now. You got tape, Sid? Yeah. Thanks. Okay. 92 inches. The Jeep's RTI before today was 468. So take our new distance traveled, 92 inches, divided by the wheelbase of 94 inches, multiply that by 1,000, and we come up with the new RTI score of 979. And although that's an impressive number, the real icing on this cake is that front axle articulation, and that's thanks to these shackles. You can see this one's still compressed fully, but when the wheel travels up the ramp, this one opens up to let that axle twist. Now, we really did stick to our budget on this one. We dropped $600 on the lockers, $50 on the spring overlift, $400 on shackles, $1,000 on tires and wheels, and $320 on the beadlocks, for a grand total of $2,370. Now, that's well underneath the $5,000 that we told you we'd spend. And you know, the reality is, although it was a lot of work and we were on the floor and it was dirty and smelly, when you can take an old rig like this and turn it into a hardcore off-road truck, that's what it's all about.